I still remember the exact moment everything inside me stopped. Not because of what was said, but because of how easily it was said in front of everyone. The restaurant was loud that afternoon, filled with clinking glasses, silverware, and conversations that never paused for long enough to matter. I stood near the center aisle holding a tray, trying to move quietly between tables like I always did. Invisible. That was the goal. Until Ethan stood up. He did not shout. He did not need to. His voice carried just enough. "Wow," he said, looking directly at me. Then he laughed. A short, sharp sound that made nearby conversations slow down. "You got fat." The words landed like something heavier than they should have been. A few people laughed awkwardly. Some looked away. Most pretended not to hear. I stopped walking. My hands tightened around the tray until my fingers hurt. For a second I thought I might drop it. I did not. I forced myself to keep standing. That was the only thing I managed to do correctly in that moment. "Ethan," someone at his table whispered, uncomfortable. But he was already leaning back in his chair like he had said something harmless. Like it was a joke everyone was supposed to understand. I did not respond. I could not trust my voice. If I spoke, I knew it would break. So I did what I had always done when things hurt too much. I moved. I placed the tray down on the nearest table with steady hands and turned away before anyone could see my face fully. I walked toward the back corridor of the restaurant, past the kitchen doors, past the noise, past the people who suddenly found their plates very interesting. Only when I reached the empty hallway did I stop. The silence back there felt different. Not peaceful. Just absent. I pressed my hand lightly against the wall and closed my eyes for a moment. My breathing was controlled. Too controlled. I told myself it did not matter. That words only had power if I gave it to them. But my body did not agree. My hand moved instinctively toward my stomach. A small, unconscious gesture. I froze immediately. No one knew. Not Ethan. Not the guests. Not the coworkers who had heard everything and said nothing. No. One knew that I was not alone anymore. The secret press quietly beneath my hand changed everything about the way I stood in that hallway. Not fear. Not shame. Something heavier. Responsibility. I opened my eyes and straightened again. Then I walked back toward the kitchen like nothing had happened. Because that was what I was good at. Acting like nothing had happened. But I was not prepared for what would happen next. Outside, I did not notice the black SUV parked across the street until later. And I did not know that inside it, someone had already been watching everything. For a few seconds, I just stood there in the hallway of the restaurant, trying to make my body behave like nothing had happened. That was the hardest part. Not the words. Not the laughter. Not even the silence that followed. It was pretending my reflection in every passing surface was still intact. I took a slow breath, adjusted my uniform, and walked back toward the kitchen. The restaurant noise hit me again immediately. Plates. Voices. Orders being called out. Life continuing as if nothing had shifted 5 minutes earlier. That was how it always worked. People moved on quickly when the moment did not belong to them. I picked up another tray and forced myself back into motion. Table 7 needed water. Table 9 needed the bill. Table 12 needed nothing, but I still checked on them anyway. Anything to stay busy. Anything to avoid thinking. Then I felt it. Not something I saw at first. Something I sensed. A shift in attention. The kind that happens when someone important enters a room. I looked up instinctively toward the entrance. The front doors were not opening. But outside, through the large glass windows, a black SUV sat parked across the street. Engine off. Still. Unmoving. That alone should not have meant anything. But it did. Because the windows were dark enough that I could not see inside. Yet I had the unmistakable feeling that someone was looking back at me. I turned away immediately. Ridiculous. I told myself it was exhaustion. Stress. Nothing more. I kept working. Another 20 minutes passed. Then 30. The SUV did not move. I tried to ignore it. Failed. Eventually I told myself it was just a coincidence. A client. A driver waiting for someone. Something ordinary. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying to myself. When my shift ended later that night, I stepped out through the back exit instead of the front. The air outside was cooler than expected. Quiet. Empty street. No noise except distant traffic. I pulled my jacket tighter and started walking toward the bus stop. That was when the engine started. Not loud. Not aggressive. Controlled. A black SUV rolled slowly into view and stopped beside the curb a few feet in front of me. My steps froze. The window-tinted glass did not lower immediately. It waited, as if deciding whether I was ready. Then it lowered halfway. Inside I saw him. I did not know his name yet, but I knew immediately he was not someone ordinary. Dark suit. Calm posture. Eyes that did not look away. He studied me quietly for a moment before speaking. Get in. One word. No explanation. No introduction. I took a step back instinctively. I do not know you. A pause. Then his voice again. You do not need to. The certainty in his tone made the world around us feel smaller. The street. The noise. The city. Everything faded slightly around the edges. I should have walked away. I knew that. Every logical part of me understood that getting into a stranger's car was the opposite of safe. But then his gaze shifted briefly, toward the restaurant behind me. Toward the window I had just walked out of. And something in his expression changed. Not anger. Not curiosity. Something closer to understanding. You are not safe here, he said quietly. I swallowed hard. Why would you say that? His answer came without hesitation. Because I have been watching you long enough to know what just happened inside. My heart stopped. Slowly I looked back at him again. Who are you? For the first time he answered with a name. And it was the kind of name that did not belong on a quiet street outside a restaurant. It belonged in stories people whispered about but never fully believed. I did not move for several seconds. The name he gave me still echoed in my mind while the cold air pressed against my skin outside the restaurant. It was not just a name. It was a presence. The kind of presence that made the entire street feel smaller the moment he spoke. I stood near the curb, half expecting him to drive away the second I hesitated. Instead, the black SUV remained exactly where it was, engine running quietly like it had nowhere else to be. You know who I am, he said again, not as a question this time. My fingers tightened around my jacket. I have heard things. A faint pause. Then his voice softened slightly. That is not the same as knowing. I did not respond, because I was not sure what answer would be safe. The restaurant door behind me opened briefly. Laughter spilled out. Someone called my name, probably a coworker finishing their shift. I almost turned back. Almost. Then I felt it again. His attention. Not demanding. Not impatient. Just steady. Waiting. Get in, he said once more. This time slower. Not louder. Just certain. I looked at the car. Then at the street. Then back at him. My entire life was built around avoiding exactly this kind of situation. Strangers. Uncertainty. Decisions made in seconds that could not be undone. Yet I was still standing there. Why? I asked quietly. The question hung between us. Raphael did not look away. Because you are trying very hard to pretend nothing happened inside that restaurant, he said. My breath caught. My hand instinctively moved toward my stomach before I stopped it. Too late. His eyes followed the movement immediately. Not intrusive. Not judgmental. Just observant. The silence stretched longer this time. You do not know anything about me, I said finally. He nodded once. Not everything. That answer should have reassured me. It did not. Instead, it made my chest tighten. Another car passed behind us. The streetlight flickered overhead. Everything around us continued moving as if this moment was ordinary. It was not. If I get in, I said carefully, what happens? Raphael considered the question for the first time. Not because he did not know the answer. Because he chose it carefully. You are not going back to that restaurant tonight, he said. I stared at him. That is not an answer. It is the only one that matters right now. My pulse quickened. Somewhere behind me the restaurant door closed again. My shift was officially over. No reason to stay. No reason to leave. Except for the feeling in my chest telling me that everything I thought was normal had already started to shift long before I stepped outside. I looked at the SUV again. Then at him. Then I made a decision I did not fully understand. I opened the door. The door closed behind me with a soft click that somehow felt louder than the engine outside. For a moment, I just sat there without moving. The interior of the SUV was quiet, dimly lit, and far removed from the noise of the street I had just left behind. Raphael did not speak immediately. He started driving the moment the door was fully shut, as if my decision had already been expected long before I made it. I looked out the window, watching the restaurant shrink in the distance. My life, as I had known it for years, remained behind those glass doors. "You are shaking," Raphael said after a while. I glanced down at my hands. He was right. I had not noticed. "It is nothing," I replied automatically. He did not argue. That surprised me. Most people would have. Most people would have asked questions I did not want to answer. The silence continued for several miles. City lights passed in blurred streaks outside the window while the road ahead stayed dark and unfamiliar. I should have felt regret. I should have felt fear. Instead, I felt something more complicated. Relief mixed with uncertainty. Eventually, I spoke again. "Where are you taking me?" Raphael kept his eyes on the road. "Somewhere you will not be disturbed." I frowned slightly. "By who?" A pause. Then his answer came calmly. "Everyone." That single word changed the way I looked at everything outside the window. I turned back toward him. "You do not even know my name." "I do," he said. I blinked. "When?" "Before you opened the door." The certainty in his voice unsettled me more than anything else that had happened that night. I looked away again, trying to process the situation logically. There was no logical part of this. "I should call someone," I said quietly. Raphael nodded once. "You can." Hesitated. My phone was still inside my bag. Unused. Ignored. Waiting. But something stopped me from reaching for it immediately. Instead, I studied him carefully. He did not feel like danger. Not in the way I expected. He felt like control. The kind of control that did not need to prove itself. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. He glanced at me briefly. "Because you left something behind." My stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" He did not answer right away. The car turned onto a quieter road. Fewer lights now. Less noise. More space between everything. Finally, he spoke again. "You left before the situation inside that restaurant finished affecting you." I stared at him. "That is not an explanation." "It is the only one that matters," he repeated. I looked down at my lap. My thoughts kept returning to the hallway. The words. The laughter. The way I walked away without letting anyone see my face fully. I had been trying to leave something behind, but it was still with me. "You do not know what kind of night I had," I said softly. Raphael's voice lowered slightly. "I know enough." The way he said it made me stop asking. The SUV slowed as we approached a gated entrance. I had not noticed how far we had traveled. The gates opened automatically. Beyond them, a long driveway stretched toward a large property I could barely see in the dark. "Where are we?" I asked again. "Somewhere safe," he said simply. The word safe sounded strange coming from someone I barely knew. The car stopped in front of a large house. Lights were on inside. Warm. Quiet. Waiting. I hesitated before opening the door. Raphael finally looked at me directly. "You do not have to decide anything tonight," he said. That was the first thing he had said all evening that felt like permission instead of direction. I stepped out slowly, unsure of what I was walking into, but more unsure of what I had just walked away from. The moment I stepped through the front gate, I realized the silence here was different. It was not the silence of emptiness. It was the silence of distance from everything familiar. The house stood ahead of me, large and dimly lit, with warm light spilling through tall windows that made it feel less intimidating than it should have. I stood still for a moment, unsure whether I had made a mistake. Raphael did not rush me. He simply waited near the car, giving me space I did not expect from someone I barely knew. "You can go inside," he said calmly. I nodded slowly, though my feet did not immediately move. "Do you always bring strangers to places like this?" I asked quietly. A faint pause. Then he replied, "You are not a stranger anymore." That answer should have made me more uncomfortable. Instead, it made my chest tighten in a way I could not explain. I walked toward the house. The front door was already open. Warm light spilled onto the stone pathway as I stepped inside. The interior was quiet, clean, and carefully arranged, like someone had designed it for stillness rather than attention. A woman appeared from the hallway almost immediately. She looked composed, professional, and unsurprised by my presence. "You must be her," she said gently. I blinked. "Her?" She smiled slightly. "We were told to prepare the guest room." I looked back toward the door. Raphael had not followed me inside yet. That detail made everything feel even more unreal. "I am sorry," I said instinctively. "I did not mean to interrupt anything." The woman shook her head. "You are not interrupting anything." Her tone was calm, as if this was not unusual at all. I followed her down a quiet hallway. The house was larger than I had realized from outside. Every step felt slightly unreal, as though I was walking through a space that did not belong to me. She led me to a room near the end of the hall. The door opened into a simple but elegant space. Neutral colors, soft lighting, nothing excessive, just calm. I stood at the entrance without moving. "You can rest here," she said. I hesitated. "I do not even know your name." She smiled politely. "Elena." I nodded slowly. "Thank you." She stepped away, leaving me alone in the doorway. I closed the door behind me and stood still for a long moment. My phone was still in my bag. I had not checked it since leaving the restaurant. I finally pulled it out. The screen lit up immediately. Missed calls. Messages. Notifications stacked one after another. My breath slowed. I had expected anger, confusion, panic. Instead, what I felt was something quieter. Distance. I set the phone down on the bed and sat beside it. The room remained silent. Outside, somewhere in the house, I could hear faint movement. Life continuing in a place I was not yet part of. I leaned back slowly, letting the unfamiliar quiet settle around me. Then I placed one hand lightly over my stomach again without thinking. The same gesture from earlier. But this time I did not stop myself. Because for the first time since that restaurant, I was no longer standing in the aftermath of what happened. I was standing in the beginning of what came next. The night passed in a way that felt unfamiliar. Not peaceful. Not chaotic. Just suspended. I did not sleep properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw fragments of the restaurant, the SUV, the silence in Raphael's voice, and the way the house felt too large for one person to understand immediately. When morning arrived, I was already awake. The light outside the window was soft and gray, filtering through curtains that I had not chosen. For a moment, I sat on the edge of the bed and simply listened. No alarms. No rushing voices. No pressure from the life I had left behind. It should have felt like freedom. Instead, it felt like uncertainty without noise. A soft knock came at the door. I straightened slightly. Yes. The door opened gently. Elena stepped inside, holding a tray. "Good morning," she said calmly. I nodded. "Good morning." She placed the tray on a small table near the window. Coffee. Simple food. Nothing excessive. I noticed immediately that no one was treating me like a guest who had to explain herself. That was new. And strange. "You did not leave during the night," Elena said gently. I hesitated. Was I supposed to? She smiled slightly. "No. But most people do." That sentence stayed with me longer than expected. I looked down at the coffee. "I am not sure what I am supposed to do here." Elena paused for a moment, then replied, "Then do nothing for now." The simplicity of the answer unsettled me more than advice ever could. After she left, I remained in the room alone again. The house was quiet but not empty. Somewhere downstairs I could hear movement. Staff. Routine. Life continuing without asking permission. I finally got up and walked toward the window. Outside, the property stretched further than I had realized the night before. Gardens. Trees. Open space that felt removed from everything I knew. My phone was still on the bedside table. I had not looked at it since arriving. It vibrated once while I was standing there. Then again. I did not move immediately. Eventually I picked it up. The screen lit up instantly. Dozens of messages. Missed calls. Unknown numbers. And one name that made my stomach tighten. Ethan. I stared at the screen for a long time without opening anything. Then I turned the phone face down again. Not because I was ignoring the world, but because I was no longer sure I belonged to it in the same way. A second knock came at the door later that morning. This time I opened it. Rafael stood in the hallway. He was dressed simply again.
No urgency. No visible tensión.
You are awake, he said. I nodded. I did not sleep much. He studied me for a moment, not in a way that felt invasive, in a way that felt aware. That is normal, he said. I leaned slightly against the doorframe. For what? A pause. Then he answered. For leaving something behind. I looked at him more carefully. You say that like I made a choice people understand. Rafael shook his head once. Most people do not need to understand it. That answer stayed in the air between us. I glanced past him down the hallway. What happens now? I asked quietly. He did not hesitate. Now you stop reacting. I frowned slightly. And start what? His gaze met mine directly. Start deciding. The simplicity of that word landed harder than anything else had since the night everything changed. Deciding. Not running. Not explaining. Not surviving. Just deciding. For the first time since the restaurant, I realized the most frightening part of my situation was not what I had left behind. It was the fact that no one was telling me what came next. Not even him. I spent most of the morning in the same room sitting by the window, without really noticing how much time had passed. The house remained quiet in a way that felt intentional rather than empty. It was a different kind of silence than the one I had known before. Not the silence of being ignored. The silence of not being required to respond. I was still trying to understand what Rafael meant when he said I needed to stop reacting. The idea sounded simple when spoken aloud. It did not feel simple in practice. Every few minutes, my phone would light up again on the table beside me. I had stopped counting the notifications. I did not open them. Not because I was avoiding reality completely, but because I was no longer ready to let it define my next move. Eventually, I stood up and walked through the hallway of the house. The space felt different in daylight. Less unfamiliar than it had seemed the night before. More structured. More lived in. I found myself pausing near a set of large windows overlooking the gardens. Outside, workers moved quietly along the paths, maintaining the grounds without speaking loudly or drawing attention to themselves. Everything here operated with purpose. Nothing felt rushed. That was something I was not used to. You have been awake for a while, Rafael said from behind me. I turned slightly. I had not heard him enter. I could not sleep again, I admitted. He nodded once as if that answer was expected. It will take time. I looked back out the window. Time for what exactly? There was a brief pause before he answered. For your life to stop feeling like it is happening to you. The words landed differently than I expected. I did not respond immediately, because I understood what he meant, even if I was not ready to admit it fully. A staff member passed quietly in the hallway behind us, carrying documents without interrupting the conversation. The house continued moving around us without forcing participation. I turned back toward Rafael. People are going to keep calling me, I said. He did not deny it. Yes. And I am supposed to ignore all of them? I asked. His answer was calm. You are supposed to choose what matters. I frowned slightly. That sounds like something people say when they do not want to deal with consequences. Rafael shook his head once. It is the opposite. It means you accept them. The honesty in that statement made me look away again. I thought about Ethan. About the wedding that had never happened. About the messages still waiting on my phone that I had not opened. I thought about how quickly my entire life had shifted without any clear instruction on how to handle it. I do not even know what I am supposed to tell people, I admitted quietly. Rafael stepped closer, not invading space, just making the conversation feel more real. Then do not tell them anything yet. I glanced at him. That is your advice? He met my gaze. That is your permission. The distinction mattered more than I expected. I exhaled slowly and turned back toward the window. For the first time, I noticed how the garden outside was not chaotic. It was arranged, maintained, allowed to exist without interruption. My phone vibrated again in my pocket. I did not reach for it this time. Instead, I simply let it continue until it stopped. Raphael spoke again after a moment. You are not trapped here. I looked at him. Then what am I? He answered without hesitation. You are paused. The word stayed with me longer than I expected. Not running. Not hiding. Just paused. For the first time since leaving the restaurant, I realized that not responding immediately did not mean losing control. It might actually be the first time I was starting to take it back. I remained by the window long after Raphael finished speaking. The word he used kept repeating in my mind. Pause. It should have felt temporary. Something light. Something reversible. Instead, it felt like standing between two versions of a life I no longer recognized. Behind me, the house remained quiet. Not empty. Never empty. There was always movement here. Always structure. Always purpose. Yet none of it demanded anything from me. That absence of pressure was more unsettling than pressure itself. My phone had stopped vibrating again. I finally took it out of my pocket and looked at the screen. The number of missed calls had increased. Messages stacked on top of each other in patterns I did not want to read. Turned the screen off before any of them could reach me fully. You are thinking too much, Raphael said from somewhere behind me. I did not turn around immediately. Is that a problem? I asked. A brief silence followed. Then his voice came closer. Only if it keeps you where you should not be. That sentence made me finally face him. He was standing near the edge of the room, not approaching further. As if he understood something about distance that I was still learning. Where should I be? I asked quietly. Raphael studied me for a moment before answering. Not in reaction to other people's expectations. The answer should have been simple. It was not. Because for most of my life, expectations had been the structure everything else was built on. I walked slowly toward the center of the room. My steps felt uncertain not because I was afraid of him, but because I was no longer sure what direction counted as forward. If I stop reacting, I said carefully, what am I supposed to do instead? Raphael did not hesitate. Decide. The word felt too large for the room, too clean for the mess inside my mind. I shook my head slightly. I already made a decision. His expression did not change. Did you? I looked away. Because that was the question I had been avoiding since the moment I stepped out of the hotel hallway. I had left something behind. That part was clear. What was not clear was whether I had chosen something in return. The silence between us stretched, but it was not uncomfortable. It felt measured, like space intentionally left for thought. Eventually I spoke again. People are going to say I ran away. Raphael nodded once. They will say many things. I frowned slightly. You do not seem concerned. Because their interpretation does not change your reality. The simplicity of that statement unsettled me more than anything else that day. I sat down slowly on the edge of the chair near the window. The city outside remained distant, visible but not reachable from here. I do not know how to explain any of this, I admitted. Raphael looked toward the window briefly before answering. Then do not explain it yet. I studied him. You make everything sound easy. A faint pause. Then it is not easy. It is just honest. The word honest stayed with me. I thought about the wedding I had left. About the life that had been waiting for me in a version I no longer felt connected to. About the hallway. The decision. The step forward. None of it felt like something I could explain to others yet. But sitting here, in a place that asked nothing from me except awareness, I realized something small but important. I was no longer running from anything. And for the first time I was beginning to understand that not every pause was an ending. Some were the space needed before a different beginning could finally take shape. The next morning arrived without urgency, as if the world itself had decided to give me space to think before forcing me to move again. I woke up in the same room in the same house, but something in me no longer felt identical to the version of myself that had walked in here days earlier. The silence was still present, but it no longer felt like it was pressing against me. It felt like it was waiting for me to decide what to do with it. I sat at the edge of the bed for a long time staring at my hands. No notifications demanded my attention. No calls interrupted my thoughts. For the first time I realized how much of my life had been shaped by constant reaction. Work messages. Social expectations. Conversations I never fully chose to enter. Raphael had called it deciding, but I was still learning what that meant in practice. A soft knock came at the door, breaking the stillness without destroying it. "Come in," I said quietly. Raphael entered without hesitation. He looked the same as before, calm and composed, as if nothing in the last few days had disrupted his world at all. That stability made him harder to read, not easier. "You have not left your room since morning," he said. I nodded slightly. I did not know where to go. He considered that for a moment. "Then do not go anywhere yet." The simplicity of the answer made me pause. I stood up slowly, walking toward the window. Outside, the property stretched farther than I had fully understood before. Trees lined the edges of the estate. Paths curved. Without urgency. Nothing here felt rushed or forced. "You live like this every day?" I asked. Raphael stepped closer but did not stand beside me. He remained at a distance that felt intentional. "I live without unnecessary noise," he said. I almost smiled. "That sounds impossible in your world." "It is only impossible if you allow everything to reach you," he replied. The words lingered longer than expected. I turned to face him. "People are not going to stop asking questions," I said. "About last night. About why I left." Raphael nodded once. "Let them ask." I frowned slightly. "That is your solution?" "It is not a problem I need to solve," he said calmly. "It is a problem you do not need to carry." That distinction stayed with me. I walked back toward the bed and picked up my phone again. The screen lit up immediately. Messages. Calls. Notifications stacked in layers of urgency. I was no longer emotionally ready to absorb. I stared at it for a long moment before turning it face down once more. "I do not know how to explain what I am doing," I admitted quietly. Raphael looked at me. "You are not required to explain it yet." I exhaled slowly. "People will think I lost control." He shook his head slightly. "People always explain things in ways that make them comfortable." I looked at him more carefully. "And what do you think?" The question hung between us. Raphael did not answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady. "I think you stopped doing something that was never fully yours." The words landed differently than anything else I had heard since leaving the wedding. Not judgment. Not approval. Just clarity. I sat down again, letting the weight of everything settle in a quieter way than before. "I do not feel like I belong anywhere right now," I said honestly. Raphael's response came without hesitation. "Then you are finally in the space where you can choose where you belong." Outside, the light shifted slowly across the windows as the day moved forward without asking for permission. For the first time since that night, I did not feel like I was escaping a life. I felt like I had stepped outside of it long enough to finally see what I had been. Inside.